Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, I don't know if you've heard the news, but the Rangers' longest tenured player is no longer here. Chris Kreider, along with a fourth-round pick sent to the Anaheim Ducks for Carey Terrence, a prospect, and a third-round pick. Anaheim takes on every penny of Kreider's $6.5 million cap hit. Number 20, it's been real. See you later, man.
This sucks. There's not really a whole lot more for me than this sucks for everybody. You know, the Rangers expected to be good last year. We operated through the first 2 months of last season with the assumption, yeah, they're dicking around, but it's like 22, 23. They'll be fine by January. They'll make a big moves. They'll get back in the mix. Carolina and the Devils aren't that scary. Do any of us really believe Washington's this good? And as we noted extensively down the backstretch of the regular season, Columbus, Ottawa, Detroit, none of these teams particularly serious or good or playing like good hockey. The Rangers were an under 500 team after acquiring JT Miller, and they still only finished 3 wins back of the last playoff spot. So I think that's a real testament to just how wrong things went. And ultimately, and unfortunately, someone's got to eat it. Someone has to take the blame, and we know the general manager isn't going to take any. He put a lot of it on Peter Laviolette. I think a lot of the decisions the team made in the last month, we spent a lot of time detailing that 2 episodes ago, talking about some of the mismanagement and the lack of opportunities for guys because Peter Laviolette was running the team a certain way, when Chris Drury very clearly had a different vision for what he was going to do going forward. And that brings us to where we are now. And we both, when we did our Rangers offseason 1.0 plan, we surmised there would be a Kreider trade. This was the most expensive player that was easily movable. And that's why Chris Kreider is no longer a New York Ranger. It's not because he doesn't have function. I entirely expect him to score between 20 and 30 goals as a Duck next year. I expect him to be closer to his normal self. We know he dealt with nagging injuries this past season. He's probably going to play a few more minutes per game. He's probably
going to, you know, of course, after the season, he was like, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that." You think so? You think, Chris? Well, like that's the argument that we make every year after the season's over. It's like, dog, you can miss game 58 of the season.
Yeah, if you shut it down,
heal a little bit, it's okay. You can do that. That's like this is allowed, especially when the team's like is not doing well. You playing injured and making your situation worse in like the 3rd week of February is not helping anybody.
No, and building off of that, which is something I was going to talk about later, but it ties in nicely to what you just said. The biggest difference production-wise for the Rangers year over year was the power play. And we know they were not nearly as dangerous on the power play this year. They went from top 5 to bottom 5 in the NHL in a 1-year swing. And a lot of that was tied to the lack of net front play, whether that was Kreider being hurt or entirely being out of the lineup. That was the biggest difference. If you go and look at the underlying numbers for the Rangers power play this year versus last year, almost like 10 fewer high danger chances per 60 minutes of ice time. And those are your goals. Like almost, and the crazy thing about when you look at Kreider's power play stats, almost all of his scoring chances are high danger chances because of where he's set up. Those are the most valuable. And even if they don't directly lead to a goal, they create a really dangerous rebound because those are going to be the in-tight plays, the sweeps of the puck up against the goalie's pads that are going to create those big rebounds, or the puck's going to sit there in the crease and wait to be hit. And I think that losing that net front ability, and you can make the argument that that was one of the transformative components of the Rangers going from rebuilding to being a contender, was they went from having an exciting power play, you know, that those 2 years of David Quinn, they were pretty good. You know, the Tony DeAngelo that first year, 2019-20, is the power play 1 quarterback. Fox eventually usurps him the year after, but they had a really good power play. And then that first year of Gallant, it all comes together perfectly. Kreider leads the league in power play goals, sets the career high with 54. That elevated the Rangers to a level where they were amongst the 5 to 10 best teams in the league because we knew their 5-on-5 play wasn't special. Even going back to under David Quinn, you know, the Rangers haven't had a positive expected goal share or scoring chance share for a full season since 2014-2015. And that goes to show you just how much they have become dependent on their special teams. And of course, special teams are your equalizer. I think if you watch the Oilers-Panther game on Saturday night, that was your opportunity. The Oilers did not play a great game at 5-on-5. They also went 0 for 3 on the power play.
Yeah, they had chances.
You convert one or two of those power plays, and even if you're not playing great, you're hanging around. You're in the game. And, we talked ad nauseum. The Rangers had like a 3-week stretch towards the end of the regular season where they conceded more shorthanded goals than power play goals they scored. Over a 2 or 3 week, we're not talking about like 2 or 3, we're talking about almost a month's worth of games where the other team scored more often 4-on-5 than the Rangers did 5-on-4. And I really know it is tied to that Chris Kreider injury that inhibited his ability to be effective. And
he couldn't be in front of the net.
No.
Because he was like, and when he wasn't doing what he normally would be doing.
The tips weren't there.
If you watch what he was doing when he scored those 50 plus goals, he was not only a threat every single opportunity, but he was a force. He was being, really difficult to move, which this past season he was a lot more easily moved because he was a lot more fragile. He needed, he really just needed like a month to heal and get himself back out there fully healthy so he could help out the power play more. But because he wasn't able to establish the net front presence that he needed in order to create the space for himself to get those deflections with the rate that he was getting a couple of years ago. And that, again, like everything ties together where, okay, well, the power play stinks. Why? Because Kreider's not getting as many tips as he would normally. Why? Because he's hurt and he's still playing. Why? Like there's everything just kind of, there's a big trickle down effect that happens here. And, I would have to imagine, like you said a minute ago, that kind of corrects itself going into this next season with Kreider healing. I would imagine is going to heal fully for enough with enough time to spare for Anaheim's training camp. And it wouldn't be surprising if he, I don't think he's going to score 50 goals again, but he's definitely going
20. I feel like is a safe bet.
20 is a safe number. Also, I think he's going to get more than one primary assist next year, which again, not a very high bar to climb over. And I highly, it would be shocking to me if he repeats that. And I think he's going to look good in a Ducks uniform. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those moments in Rangers history, and I guess in hockey history as well, where it's like you don't want to make this trade. No one's happy about it. All the fans and the management and Chris, like everybody didn't want this to happen. But if you look at what happened last season, where the cap is going, what the Rangers need, and where Chris Kreider is going, ultimately this unfortunately had to happen. And it sucks. Like, I love Chris Kreider as a Ranger. He was one of the best playoff performers to ever wear the jersey. And I know, there were stretches, especially during like the regular season where, like, where's Chris Kreider? Is he even out there on the ice? But then he played, that incredible third period against Carolina where he scored that hat trick in a game where the Rangers were falling off a cliff so insanely quickly. They were up 3-0 in the series. Then it was 3-1. And it's like, everything was spiraling out of control. And then Chris Kreider said, no. This series is over. I'm taking over now. Good luck stopping me. And then he literally single-handedly won the Rangers that series. Those are the types of moments that I think will ultimately, the debate for this, is it too early, whatever, but like, I think moments like that will ultimately be why you will see a Chris Kreider 20 up in the rafters at some ethereal point. It probably won't be, obviously when he's playing. It might not be like as soon as he retires, but I would think maybe in like 10 years from now, Chris Kreider's number will be there. So, one of the best playoff performers this team has ever seen. And for all of his faults, I mean, he was a great player here and a great person by all accounts. And, this team and the city's going to miss him.
It's one of those really self-value things. They tell you that a lot when you're in college. Like, your college experience is what you make of it. And trying to discern the meaning and the purpose of things is something we all kind of grapple with to varying degrees in all aspects of life. And something I've really spent a lot of time over the last week thinking about is, and this isn't a groundbreaking take, but the thought that the way we talk about sports, the ring culture dominated lexicon we operate under, where if you don't win, it doesn't really matter. And it becomes, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does Chris Kreider's career not matter because the Rangers didn't win the Stanley Cup? Did the Rangers not have a successful windows, plural, with Chris Kreider on the team? And those memories, those moments, they happened. We watched them. Sometimes you were in the building. Sometimes you were on TV. And a real metronome type player for an extended period of time. And you alluded to it. He's got a lot of franchise records for the postseason. He's tied for first for a few. He's got first. He's got second. He's got third in a couple as well. And you have to make the determination. And this will be a topic until the Rangers declaratively either retire the number or won't, but are we celebrating the best player from a period of time where the team didn't win anything? Chris Kreider was never the best player on the Rangers. He was never the best in the league, no individual awards, but he's got the playoff stats. The Rangers were consistently a playoff team during his tenure. And ultimately, it comes down to what you care about. We can have this exact same conversation about Mitch Marner. And I don't think Mitch Marner's entirely similar because it's not as long and the individual team records are a little bit more out of reach for him. But if Mitch Marner continues on his current NHL trajectory, I would expect him to make the Hockey Hall of Fame in 15 to 20 years. And he didn't win anything with the Leafs. He hasn't won an individual award, but he was one of the best players during a really successful period for the team. Does that matter? Or do you need the individual awards? Do you need to have the championships to be considered an all-time great in the franchise? And I don't have a good answer for you, because I feel like if I say yes, then we're incentivizing or we're devaluing how hard it is to win. And I think that's why all of us put such a reverence, especially in hockey, on the guys who do win and win consistently, that it is really hard to win a championship. I've been alive 28 years. The Rangers have made the Stanley Cup final once in those 28 years.
Yeah.
The Oilers have made it 3 times in 35 years since the last time they won. You don't get to those trips all that often. And we see in the NHL, we are operating in a dynastic window where it's the same 5 or 6 teams that dominate the league for 3 or 4 years, and then teams start to cycle out in transition. And what does that mean for guys in this era? Does Chris Kreider effectively become a slightly better Max Pacioretty in the pantheon of guys all time? Really good, represented America in the Olympics or in international play. Never the best, but really good. Teams never won anything. What does that matter to? Who does that matter to? And I think that gets to something we had talked about when it comes to Sam and having something for him as well. You want to celebrate these things. These individual institutional things matter. One of the things I give the Yankees a lot of credit for is it is a privilege to be a Yankee. The expectation is you are going to understand the history. We've got all the retired numbers, all of the championships, and it's something I've critiqued the Mets for a lot, is that they don't celebrate their history as much, and they don't have the team success. They don't have the individual players, but you want to celebrate that because that's part of your team's identity and its DNA. That, yes, the Rangers didn't win a Stanley Cup with Chris Kreider. They won the second most playoff games of any team in the 2010s that didn't win the Stanley Cup. Undoubtedly one of the most successful periods in the history of the New York Rangers franchise. And this guy was the 3rd or 4th best player on a lot of those teams that went really far and had all of these lasting memories. Sure. And it creates the question, what do you value and what does your franchise value? We make fun of certain teams for taking certain things too seriously versus taking certain things unseriously. And I genuinely don't know. If Chris Drury has a Glenn Sather run where he's in a role till he's 75 or 80 years old, and Chris Drury's well, Chris Kreider sandbagged me when I thought I was going to have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. Okay, well, he's not getting his number retired if Chris Drury's here for 50 years.
I mean, I think blanket statements for retired jerseys is not the way to go. I think it genuinely comes down to case by case basis. When it comes to like, the easiest answers are like, okay, well, Connor McDavid's going to get his jersey retired. Like Wayne Gretzky's like, it's going to get his jersey, right? Like these are no brainer. No one's arguing against it. Like these are names that will be up there when it's all said and done. With guys like Chris Kreider, it very much depends on the case by case basis where did you win a cup? No. Were you the best player on the team that went to the cup? No. But Chris Kreider,
he was a driving force. He came back from the injury in that Penguin series.
He was he encapsulated truly what it means to be a Ranger. Through the bad, through the good, through everything in between. If you think about, what it like actually means in the whole grand scheme of things to be a member of the New York Rangers, Chris Kreider was that type of player. He got to the dirty areas. He was one of the best players in front of the net. That's where he made his money. That's where he made the last, he was incredible at it. Like he is the type of prototype that, you think about what the DNA of this franchise is that, I guess like middle class, like hardworking type of player that never truly like shined above everybody else for a long period of time, but not only showed up to work every day with a smile on his face, but he worked every single day to do everything he can for this team. And, a lot of what I just said was maybe a little bit of platitudes, but at the end of the day, like that's what the retirement jerseys, some of them are for. Like some of them are for the, the Lemieux and the Crosbys and, all these guys and Ovechkin and whoever else. But some retired players are for the bread and butter. This guy encapsulates what it meant to be a part of this team for this period of time. And Chris Kreider, to me anyway, deserves that recognition because that's who he was.
I think something interesting we can talk about off of this before we start talking more about what's going to happen next and some of the things the Rangers need to think about. I think Kreider's a really good microcosm of the last 15 years of Rangers hockey, where always really good, never the best, never elite, but constantly around, 14th most goals over the last 5 years. I think he's like 20 something over the last 10 years. He's top 20 last 5 years. A really good run. Never anything insane. I think he made 1 or 2 all-star games at some point, but the all-star game selections in hockey don't matter to the same degree they do in the other sports. Very much like the Rangers, a couple President's trophies. Yeah. Good, but not great. Only made 1 cup final, never beat teams better than them really. The only series I would say was a major upset that they pulled off was probably 2014 against Pittsburgh, when most of us probably expected the Penguins to go through there. But a really good team, and a team that's made an indelible impact on a lot of us, where we grew up with a lot of these guys. Chris Kreider debuted as a Ranger when I was in the 9th grade.
In the playoffs.
I'm 28 years old now. He was on the team long enough to be one of like the final touch pieces of a core. That core burns out, 4-year rebuild. Core gets better. Core goes to 2 conference finals again and burns out again. He survived 3 roster life cycles before getting moved on. And the last thing I wanted to say before I throw it back to you and how we can open this conversation up a little bit more, the Rangers have made the calculation that Chris Kreider's money is more valuable than whatever Chris Kreider would do for them next year.
Right.
I don't necessarily know if that's the case, because Chris Kreider, if he records 25 to 30 goals next year at like $6.5 million, 6.25, whatever he makes, that's going to be cheaper than whatever you're going to replace him with. Like, even if you think you're going to replace him with a defenseman, and we'll get there as far as like Gavrikov or Provorov or whomsoever in this conversation, but like, okay, Let's say you spend some of that on one of those defensemen, one of those left-handed defensemen, and you're going to say, well, we finished with a dead zero goal differential last year. We were 255 goals for, 255 goals against, and the league average for both was 246. So we're surmising we needed to concede about 10 fewer, 15 fewer goals to win 3 to 4 more games. You do that on top of, well, positive regression, and we need to replace Kreider's 20 goals you're subtracting from the lineup. And the math is doable, but the question becomes, what's more valuable, the 20 to 30 goals Chris Kreider would give you, or that $6.25 million? And the prevailing sentiment amongst a lot of the opinions I have read, both in columns, heard on podcasts, read in the comment section, both under tweets and under news articles, is I don't really trust Chris Drury to have $7 million of liquidity. You know, that there's something, I forget what the name of the professor is. I think it's Scott Galloway. Something he talks about very often is that the reason giving poor people more money works is because they spend it. Poor people will always spend their money because they don't have a lot of it, whereas rich people will save it. The Rangers are like that, where they instantly come up with money and then they're going to spend it. You know, we saw this happen in real time.
Yeah.
They got rid of $11.5 million in cap space over a 12-month period between Trouba and Gaudreau, and they spent it on Borgen, they spent it on Vakanainen, on JT Miller, and on Juuso Parssinen. What's more valuable, those 5 guys or the $11.5, $12 million? Now, JT Miller is a very good player. At the number he's at, you can accept that. That's reasonable.
Sure.
But is what you're paying Will Borgen, what you're getting from him, from Vakanainen, from Parssinen, from Carson Soucy, who apparently they want to get rid of already? And that's what this becomes.
Third round pick, I think it was, right? They traded away to get him, only to healthy scratch him, and now he's gone, like allegedly going to be gone. Very cool stuff.
And
on that front. Also, by the way, again, it's one of those that was one of those moments in time where like that tweet comes out of like, you know, if you just pay me $1 million to say no to you a couple of times a year, like that's my job.
Like, what's more valuable,
Please.
A third round pick or Carson Soucy? Like,
right.
I know this sounds dumb, and I tweeted this yesterday. Say these things out loud. Like, you know, when you're practicing doing like public speaking, or like if you want to make sure your writing sounds good, you read it out loud. Say these things out loud to other people and watch their facial expressions and read their eyes and their body language. Does this make sense? Are you going to get something better than Chris Kreider in free agency? Maybe. You know, can Brad Marchand give you 30 goals for 1 year at 37? Maybe. And that's the question here. Can you do a better job with that $6 million?
Look real good in
He's leading. He's got 6 goals in the Cup final alone.
Yeah.
He's still
got it.
And he's looked better. He's looked better than he has the last 2 years or so with the Bruins, the last month or so with Florida. And that's the first real question I have. And we won't know until they spend this money that they've come up with, whether that's Cooley extension, Miller extension. And we'll talk about those guys too, because their names have come up in varying places as well. Paterka, there's a whole lot to get to, but do you think Chris Drury is going to do a good job with $6.5 million? You see what he thinks is valuable and how much it costs for those things. Like we keep hammering the point. You're signing guys to contracts, and these guys wouldn't play on the Oilers or the Panthers or the Stars or the Hurricanes or the Jets or the Avs. You know, that's your bar. It's not just that they're better than what we had. That's great. Are we better than we were when the season started last year? On paper, no. On paper, the team is worse. You took out a 30-goal guy in Chris Kreider. You need 3 left-handed defensemen right now because you don't have Miller, you don't have Jones, and Vakanainen, Soucy, and who am I forgetting? There's one more left-handed defenseman I'm forgetting. This is bad radio. Soucy?
Regardless, like it's a great question because I think at the end of the day, like, you know, with Drury's acquisitions, a lot of the time is not necessarily about who the player is. Sometimes it is. I mean, Soucy and, you know, Vakanainen, who was a throw-in, gets an extension for reasons. Like Will Borgen gets a 5-year extension, and who they outbid themselves to get. That continues to be a head scratcher. Some of the time, it's not about who specifically he goes and gets, it's the money and the length and the type of contract he gives out in order to acquire that player. Like, you traded a 3rd round pick for Carson Soucy, and he has a no move clause. So on top of you giving up a third round pick to get a player that was so bad in Vancouver, he was equally as bad for you, so bad that you had to healthy scratch him, and now allegedly you want to move him, but he has a no move clause. So if he doesn't want to go, he doesn't have to go. So like, you know, if Carson Soucy was like an seventh defenseman making like league minimum or a million, you know, like 1.25 or whatever, that is way more manageable. But because you traded for that full 3.25 and you can't move him unless he specifically signs off on it, now you're handcuffing yourself further. And that is one of the biggest concerns that you should have if you're a Rangers fan with Chris Drury, because he has a track record of either giving out or acquiring players with no move clauses like it's candy. And the thing about no move clauses is that like only the best players on your team should have them. Everybody else should not be getting no move clauses.
No trade clauses are not for third line and fourth line players. Right, they're not for depth to players.
I understand the Rangers did not give Carson Soucy that no move clause, but why does he have one in the first place? That doesn't make that's
not the utility of the function.
Zoom out for a second. Like that doesn't make any sense, period. But also, you're going out in if you look at the Rangers roster, they already have enough players with either no move clauses, like modified no trade clauses, whatever. There's a bunch of players on this team right now that have that already. This team did not make the playoffs. So you went out and then you got another one to add to the list during a season and now summer where you need to make a bunch of changes. Well, good luck when you can't move anybody. What is the point?
And that's what I've had so many people over the last few weeks ask me, do you think the Rangers will be better next year? And logic would tell you yes. You don't need a huge swing for them to be that much better. I mean, they shouldn't have a stretch where they go 5-15 and tank their entire season.
You would hope.
They only need to win 3 more games than last year. If you want to be a little aggressive and say, hey, last year was like a really down year, 91 points probably isn't enough. Okay. You need to win 4 or 5 more games to get to the mid-90s, and that'll get you to one of the last 2 wild cards. Okay. That's not out of the question. You go 10-10 as opposed to 5-15, you're in the playoffs, and 10-10 is not a very high bar. But as you just said, Andrew, they have all of these guys they cannot get rid of to varying degrees of not get rid ofness. And I think the comparison and the reason why I think the Kreider example is really straightforward, it's the same thing we talk about with investing, where you either have liquidity or you have assets. Liquidity is nice. You can just spend your money. But if you need to liquefy your assets, you are going to put yourself where you might not get what you want full price. You might have to take less than what you bought it for. And then even if you have the liquidity, you still need to reinvest. You still need to eventually put that money somewhere, whether that's buying something or buying new assets. And the Rangers didn't have a lot they could they won't have a lot to create more liquidity. Could they trade Alexis Lafreniere before the no trade kicks in? He's at his lowest possible value. The same thing with Chelney Miller.
For pennies on the dollar for who?
Yeah,
another
depreciated asset. That's great. The only way that type of trade works. It's the same thing. Like the Rangers need their version of that for like Darcy Kemper for Pierre-Luc Dubois, where neither team was happy with the guy they had.
Sure.
The Kings wanted the cap space. The Capitals said we might be terrible the next few years. We'll take him. We'll pay him the money. We need bodies. We need guys. And he had a nice season, and Kemper had a good season for LA. That's the Alexis Lafreniere trade here. And real quick before I throw it back to you. So you're sitting here with 5 of the same 7 defensemen as last year currently under contract. You need to figure out Zach Jones and K'Andre Miller. I don't think Zach Jones, even if they keep him, is going to get a serious look when you see the other guys they've brought in. Soucy, Vakanainen, Borgen, Bigger, a little I would say, a little more of the rugged profile as opposed to what Zach Jones brings. Okay, so you need a first pair left-handed defenseman. And what do we say every year on July 1st, Andrew? You can't win the Stanley Cup the first day of free agency, but you certainly can lose it.
100%.
Because if you sell your stock and you buy Enron, that's not going to work out. If you sell your entire stock portfolio of stuff that you can sell right now to get liquidity, and then say, all right, I'm going to put it all in Doge. I'm going to put it all in whatever
on the next meme coin that's going to get rug pulled in 6 minutes.
If you're going to put it all in Hawk Tua coin, okay. If you're going to do that,
not financial advice.
Do not, in no circumstance, take financial advice.
Do not
from
do
me.
that.
Do not ever take financial advice from me. But that's the kind of proposition here. You just finally found some liquidity. You had a bunch of stuff you couldn't get rid of because of timeline stuff. You couldn't get rid of it. You couldn't sell it for a certain point. Okay, we got all this money. Let's go to the casino and bet it all on black, because that's what giving Ivan Provorov 7 years at 30 years old is. That's what giving it Gavrikov 7 years, $8 million, $9 million a year for guys who don't put up counting stats. If we're talking about, like, hypothetically, like if Noah Dobson was a free agent and you wanted to say, hey, we'll pay him $9 million a year because he is a puck mover, he's going to record points. Yeah, he's going to have volatility. He's going to be disappointing at times. You can at least sell me that there's some upside there.
Sure.
Gavrikov and Provorov are both in their late 20s, about to be 30. Neither guy is a number one defenseman. I think Gavrikov is between a 2 and a 4, somewhere in there, depending on the team he's on.
And the Rangers don't necessarily need a number one because they have Adam Fox, but
someone for Adam Fox.
They do need someone that not only can, like, I hate the term eating minutes, but because, like, that means nothing. It just means that the coach puts you on the ice a lot. Doesn't mean that you're actually good at defending when you're out there. But, like, they need somebody with Adam Fox that can not only play those minutes, but also defend well in those minutes. They need to give Adam Fox a genuine partner.
Yeah.
However much that's going to cost, like, even if you get, like, you know, even if they do sign Gavrikov to this, you know, massive contract, that massive overpay, if Gavrikov and Fox are this great defensive pair, then it's way more digestible. That's like, but again, it's a gamble because you're giving Gavrikov, like, let's say it's Gavrikov or Provorov or, you know, whomsoever you want to put in this example, right? Like, if let's say you give back Gavrikov a 7-year deal, $9 million, whatever, you know, like you said, he's about to be 30. And you're signing him for 7 years, which is a massive gamble for a big contract. I understand the cap is, you know, going up by a considerable amount, and there's going to be a lot more flexibility with these types of contracts, but it's still more money than you should reasonably be giving a player of that caliber. It is a gamble. If Gavrikov is a match made in heaven with Adam Fox and it works out tremendously, the gamble pays off. But you have to understand that it is still a big gamble because if it doesn't work out, the domino effect is disastrous because now you have a guy on your team that can't play to his contract. 1, isn't trusted by his coaches to be that role. 2, 3 is unmovable. Because everyone sees how bad they are and will not trade for him unless you add like a second-round pick, like what the Rangers had to do with Patrick Nemeth. Like
that was 2 second-round picks, by the way.
2 second, yeah. Like this is the gamble that you take, and can it work? Sure, I'm not saying that it can't, but
there is probability associated with there. And that's the thing. That's the thing, because like it's not a 50-50 of does this work out versus it doesn't. It's okay, you get to do that 7 or 8 times because you have 7 or 8 seasons under contract. And here's how I want to tie K'Andre Miller into this, and it's very similar to the question I just asked you about Chris Kreider. What do you think is more likely? K'Andre Miller bouncing back at 25, 26, and 27, which is what the assumption would be. The Rangers would walk him to unrestricted free agency. That you think Mike Sullivan, who you think is a very good coach, can coax better play out of him? Or do you think you will get better value in play from Gavrikov, Provorov, or whatever left-handed defenseman you want to play with Adam Fox? Because we saw for 2 months last year, Fox and Miller put up really good numbers together. And it's not the prettiest to the eye test because neither guy is particularly physical, neither guy is particularly good at the net front. The underlying numbers were good. They outscored their opponents. It's not the most conventional tools pair in terms of what you typically expect from your best two defensemen, but it worked. It was good enough that they were not losing those minutes. You had one actively good pair. And then the trickle-down effect, one of the few places trickle-down stuff works, if you have K'Andre Miller and Adam Fox together and that works out, okay, then you need a more specialized role. You only need a second left pair defenseman or a third pair defenseman. Those are easier to find. They are less expensive. They have more specialized skill sets. And you can talk yourself into, okay, they probably can't find a left-handed defenseman, a top six wing, or a top six center. Excuse me, a third line center, not a top six center. Because that's the calculation. They need a third line center, because I really doubt Juuso Parssinen is good enough to be a third-line center on a playoff team, or Zibanejad's going to be the third-line center, and they need a top-six winger to replace the vacancy created by Zibanejad coming down.
And Kreider being traded.
I assume the in-house solution is that Lafreniere goes back to playing on the left, and then you assume some permutation of Cooley, Perreault, Othman in augmentation of Lafreniere, and none of those guys are proven top six NHL wingers. Sure. You know, Lafreniere has one good season, one okay season, and three questionable ones at this point. So you need to find at least one top six player forward. You need to find a defenseman, a left-handed defenseman, that's probably going to be either a second or a first pair guy. You probably have a better chance of finding a second pair guy than a first pair guy. You probably have a better chance of finding a third line center than a first line right wing. You got to think about these calculations. Like, as much as it would be helpful if you said, we're going to go hardcore, we're going to go Trocheck, Zibanejad, Miller down the middle. We are going to have the best 1-2-3 center punch in the league. Zibanejad gets more specialized minutes, lower quality of competition, a little bit more focus on creating offense, because that would be the specialized role there. And then putting your lineup together becomes a little bit easier because you're not looking for as important or big of roles. And that's why I don't think going for the big left-handed defenseman on free agency or in a trade is the easiest path here. And as you said, it absolutely could work out. Gavrikov was pretty good this year for the Kings. He was pretty damn good. Provorov is the quintessential tweener top four defenseman, where on a bad team, he can be the number one D. He's going to eat a lot of minutes. He's going to play pretty mediocre defense, but he's going to run your first power play. He's going to create some offense. He's going to give you a headache. On a good team, you play him a little bit lower. You know, if Provorov's your third, fourth, fifth defenseman, okay, I think he's a lot more capable of doing something well there. And I
also,
think,
as an aside, and I don't mean to cut you off, but as an aside, isn't Provorov the guy that was upset at Columbus for not being the power play quarterback when you play behind Zach Werenski?
Zach Werenski?
It's going to be the same problem here. Like, if he signs here, you're going to be playing behind Adam Fox. Like, I hate to break it to you, but that it's going to be the same situation. So either you stop talking, or which, you know, there's been a couple of instances with Provorov where that would probably be the better option, or you don't sign here. Like that, like those are the two options with Provorov specifically. I know your point was, you know, not to Provorov specifically, but like that's, you know, that just as an aside, but also like the genuinely, if Mike Sullivan does this one thing, he might just win the Jack Adams in my heart because of this. If he stabilizes the ups and downs, that would change so much about how this team plays. Yeah. We talk about guys like Lafreniere, K'Andre Miller, who are very like either really like up there and are dominating, or look so bad that people are questioning if they should be in the lineup. If Mike Sullivan can come in and fix that, I think this team will have like just like, I don't want to say more serene feel to them, but just
less chaotic,
a lot less chaotic. This season had so many chaotic moments where you never knew what was going on ever. whether that be on the ice, off the ice. One game they look really good. Next 3 they look abysmal, like they've never played hockey before together, and it's like this whole mishmash of talent that somehow found their way onto the same ice surface. Like the biggest thing for Mike Sullivan here is if he can essentially calm everybody down and have them play to their strengths. Have Lafreniere be more consistent. Have Kendra Miller be more consistent. Bring up Perreault, bring up Othman, and have them play to their strengths. Obviously, this is a tall order. I'm not saying it's going to be easy.
Oh, there's so many moving parts.
But what I am saying is that if he does do that, I mean, I don't have a vote, but Jack Adams is 100% going to Mike Sullivan if he accomplishes even like some of that.
And like, some of this comes down to just basic probability of what do you think is more likely. And it really does seem, based on just the rationale of how difficult it would be to move pretty much anybody else that has some upside, if you really wanted to, and we talked about this in season as far as Shesterkin last fall of like, okay, if you want to start over, by all means, trade Shesterkin. If you have a plan and you want to start over, you could do that. I think if you were to do that with Panarin or with Zibanejad, I think that would be fundamentally going pretty close to saying we're starting over. And that's not because I think
they are trying to move Zibanejad, in fairness, and Zibanejad's like, nah, bro, I'm not going anywhere. So,
and that's the thing, because like if he's not going to go anywhere, he's here. Panarin's only got next year. And like, again, it becomes a probability thing of, do you think you can sign Panarin to a new deal at a workable number to keep him in the fold, but he can't be the 3rd highest paid player in the NHL anymore. He can't. He's not going to give you that value of production into his mid to late 30s. He's just not.
Nashville will take him and then give him $15 million a year.
And like, I think there are plenty of teams who would love to have Panarin as like their 4th best, their 3rd best player. If you could add him as a walkier player where you get one real swing, if we get to February and the Rangers aren't in a playoff spot or aren't playing particularly well, and Colorado or Winnipeg or a Dallas or Florida or Tampa Bay or a really good team wants to have Panarin for one run, the Rangers can really kickstart whatever that next version of the team is and really make some progress and that's what sucks about the Kreider trade is you sold him at the lowest possible value and you only got liquidity. That 3rd round pick has to be cashed in. You need to do something with that, whether you trade that or use it. And then you need to use whatever you get. If you get a roster player, you throw them in the lineup or you draft a player, and how long does it take for the player you draft to become useful or valuable enough that you can trade them? And there are so many moving parts here. There are so many different things to consider. And it's why this offseason really does have the rock or the hard place feel of there are no good decisions here. The Rangers are entirely boxed in. They had to give away a 20-goal scorer for a 3rd round pick and a prospect who might make the NHL. Not even like be good, like make the NHL, like play 100 games, level NHL prospect. Okay, now you need a top 6 wing, at least a top 4 left-handed defenseman. Right. And I could argue you probably need a top 9 forward on top of that. Because like as much as we're all optimistic to varying degrees on Othman, Perreault, Berard, maybe an Adam Sikora, McConnell Barker, someone in that ilk of getting a look, good training camp, maybe they sneak their way. Even if we're all optimistic, excited, none of those guys have track records at all to bank on. And we know the Rangers do not like having that many young guys in the lineup. And we know historically teams that win the Stanley Cup don't have rookies in the lineup. It is extremely rare for a team to have one, let alone like 2 or 3 guys with less than 50 NHL games in their careers prior to making the playoffs. It's just, there's a strong correlation in NHL history, especially in this cap era, of teams that experience becomes important and young guys not getting featured roles on really good teams. Edmonton is the oldest team in the NHL. Florida really only has a handful of guys that have started from the bottom and grown and blah, 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 like Lindell. But you sit here and you think about everything the Rangers need just to become a playoff team again, let alone to become a Stanley Cup contender. And unfortunately, it feels like the better answer here is you probably have to trade Panarin. You probably have to try and trade Zibanejad. And yeah, that would create almost $20 million in space if you could find a way to get rid of both of those guys. But then you need to find 60 to 70 goals to replace them. And as much as I love Moneyball, recreating 70 goals in the aggregate is a lot harder than it sounds.
Sure.
The league average is 245 for a whole team. 70 is about a third, rough math, about a third of your entire offense. And again, that's just to be average, not even saying good.
And again,
you have
too,
a bad defense.
Recreating goals in the aggregate is what teams like Carolina do.
Yeah.
Where they're a good team and they have relative playoff success, but then they get to the conference finals and they need that superstar to say, this is our series, get out of my way, I'm going to score a goal. And they don't have that. And then they fall and then they go back again and then they try the same thing again. And then they go back to the conference finals and they look miserable again. And then they bow out again. And I know Connor McDavid hasn't had the greatest final series to this point, but even then, he's made some incredible plays that non-superstars won't even try making, because Connor McDavid is such a difference maker. He's directly responsible for so many even goals or close calls or some of these opportunities where you put pretty much anybody else in that same position and that play doesn't materialize in the same way, but because it's McDavid and because his skill set is so incredibly high, he has the ability to make it happen, all while making it look really easy. So if you trade Panarin, you trade Zibanejad, okay, that's fine. But let's say push comes to shove, it's game 82 of the playoffs, and you need Ole Jokinen to score in the shootout to put you in the playoffs. Are you trusting Ole Jokinen, or are you trusting somebody else that has shown they can do it? That's the difference. Trading those guys is fine, and there's merits to that. But if you don't replace them with guys that have similar skill sets that can score a goal or make that pass in the most dire moment of the season, then the trade doesn't make sense. And that's the fine line to trading guys like that. Obviously, I've harped on Zibanejad for a long time. So have you, where, for that kind of money, he's not
worth it. He's just not worth it.
He's not doing the things that the team needs. However, he's still, in these seasons where we feel that way, he's still putting up 50, 60
70
points.
Yeah.
So if you trade him, okay, go ahead. But you cannot you can't trade him for 2 second-round picks or whatever it is, and then be like, oh yeah, well, everybody else will pick up the slack. That is how you lose games.
Yeah. That is how you start losing ground more so than you already are. And that's the build off of this and the larger point. There's a strong argument here that they're going to be decent next year. Not good, but they'll hang around, be in the mix for a playoff spot and make the playoffs. They won't be better than Florida. They probably won't be better than Tampa Bay. The Devils could be better. Carolina could be better. Toronto could be better. Ottawa could be better. Columbus, maybe, if they go out and get Mitch Marner, Columbus becomes a really interesting team. And that really starts to build it out of, are we really going to have a year where we're just average with one of the 5 best goalies in the world and one of the 5-10 best defensemen in the world? We're just going to waste the last year of Panarin's contract, all 3 of those, there's nothing we could do. We were cap strung this year. We'll get him back next year. It just becomes a really difficult proposition. And again, it ties back to the probability conversation. What do you think's more likely? The Rangers take a step forward, but don't make any real noise in the playoffs, maybe win a round, maybe even 2. I struggle to see a world where they would be able to beat Florida right now. I really don't think even Florida's going to lose one of Sam Bennett or Marchand. They probably lose Ekblad. They'll still find.
They will lose Ekblad. Ekblad
almost
is
certainly.
Yeah,
almost certainly going to lose Ekblad, and you're going to need a top 4 defenseman to play with Forsling. And the Rangers need 3 left-handed defensemen.
I can get Carson Soucy. It's fine.
Again, what do you think is more likely? The Rangers getting something good out of Carson Soucy, or the Panthers getting something good out of a 4th defenseman from somewhere else that's going to go into the Nate Schmidt OEL role? You start laying out these probabilities and you start gaming it out. And the undercurrent of all of this that we haven't said in the last 20 minutes is we've already established the Rangers core isn't good enough. Like, even if you clear some space and you bring in new pieces, great. If you bring Sam Bennett in, sure. If you bring Sam Bennett in, you bring Brad Marchand in, okay. Still doesn't make Panarin better than Barkov.
Right.
Still doesn't give you a guy who's good as Sam Reinhart or Matthew Tkachuk. And don't get me wrong, if you dropped Sam Bennett and his like 17 playoff goals onto the Rangers last year, they're a better team. He's still not better than Barkov. He's not better than Reinhart. He's not better than Matthew Tkachuk. And we have seen the limitations of this type of team where your best player is your goalie, your second best player is your number one defenseman. The Rangers and the Jets are very similar in that respect, where we have seen them struggle against teams where the best player on the other team is a forward. And we know a forward has the most impact of the three, forward, D, goalie. And as much as goalie can help you keep it even, the best they can do is even. A goalie cannot actively win you the game. The best a goalie can do is 0-0. So your best player, your best skater is a defenseman. Your best player overall is your goalie. You adding a 50 to 70 point forward is not going to be enough to swing everyone else. And even if they make Zibanejad or Panarin or Trocheck or JT Miller better by having a better line mate, they're still not good enough to get to where they want to go. And that's why it feels like next year almost has to be a tweak year, we'll get them next year type year. Sure, we'll make the playoffs, very reminiscent of Washington 2 years ago, where make the playoffs, great. Not going to beat the number one seed, and you're going to go home early, and then you're going to have more of an opportunity because then Panarin's off the books. You have another year less on Zibanejad's contract, and maybe it's a little easier to trade him or convince him to accept the trade, but you're still adding more volatility overall, and that's my story. Like, as we start to wrap up today's episode, the Rangers are going to have to take on a lot of risk in the next 12 months. Even if it's like, oh, we're going to go and try and get Peterka. Okay, well, you got to go either agree to a trade with Buffalo, or you need to go get your second round pick back from Utah,
right,
so you can offer sheet him. And because you need that second round pick, Utah can charge you an arm and a leg for it. And you're adding more volatility. Okay, well, we're burning 3 draft picks on JJ Peterka, and he's got to work out. And if he doesn't work out, we burn 3 draft picks on a 55-point forward who's just a little bit better than Lafreniere. The more volatility you add, the bigger those swings are. You know how you said like 10 minutes ago, Andrew, if the Rangers could find a way to even out those big swings from Miller and Lafreniere, they would be a lot better.
Sure.
Well, if you add even more risk throughout your lineup and those pendulum swings are bigger and bigger, all we're doing is making this more explosive, more dynamic, rolling around with some rags of kerosene
the
by
stack
a campfire.
on green just keeps increasing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, could it hit? Yeah, sure. But like, a lot has to go right for that to happen. And that's the problem that we're trying to break apart here. Like, you don't have to bet it all on green. That's the thing. Like, you can break it up. And at least like, or the better, like, you don't have, like, the less gambling that you do with your roster construction, like, a little bit here and there in the right situation. I'm not saying, you should never do it.
No,
but,
of course. You have to take chances.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But strategic ones.
The gambles have to make sense, especially like long-term. If you're giving out a long-term contract, or short term, like if you're doing reclamation projects, those are very easy to switch out if they don't work out. If you give a 13th forward, the $1 million deal and say, okay, we'll go show us you belong. And if you don't, well, we could just waive you, or we set, like this, it's not a big gamble. But if you're giving Vlad Gavrikov an 8-year deal, a 7-year deal for a lot of money, you're gambling your house. You are putting your house on the stock market essentially, where if it works out, great. You now have your house back, and then you bought
a boat.
Yeah, you got a boat now. Like you can make all those Instagram reels about how you're, if you're retired at 38 or whatever, and then you're having a great time. But if you lose your bet, you are homeless.
If you lose your bet, you have Mark-Edward Vlasic. That's basically
right,
what
exactly.
This is. If you lose your bet,
you are stuck with the corpse of a player who is not going anywhere, is unmovable,
literally immovable,
stuck against, stuck to your cap for years and years, and you're also homeless because you lost your house betting it. So like, this is what we mean by the volatility. You don't have to bet your house in these situations.
No.
Like, you can bet $1, you can bet $2. But betting your house seems kind of ridiculous, right? In this situation, when you don't have a backup plan, like, it's not like you have 7 houses and you're betting one, to hit, and then all of a sudden you can buy a yacht. Like, no, you have one house. Why are you betting it? That doesn't make any sense. But that is the type of gamble that the Rangers and other teams make when they give out these massive contracts to players that are 30, 31, 32 years old. Could it work? Yeah, sure. But if it doesn't, oh boy, are you stuck with a massive problem that you have no way of getting out of.
And the other part of this conversation is, how can you afford to punt a season when your 3 best and most expensive forwards are 31, 32, and 33? Yeah. Panarin won't be on the team next year if they don't give him an extension, if he doesn't get a new contract. Okay, so you need to replace 90 points on top of, you need better from the Kreider replacements. You need all of the young guys to hit, and that's even more volatility. You're banking on Othman and Perreault both being 15 to 30 goal guys next year. When was the last time a Rangers rookie scored 20 goals in a season in their first full season? It took Chris Kreider 10 years to become a 30 goal scorer. And for context, and I tweeted this a few weeks ago, because somebody had said something along the lines of, well, why would you want Jason Robertson, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't that good last year. Jason Robertson had 113 points 2 years ago. That would be the 3rd best season in the history of the New York Rangers franchise, between the Panarin season last year and the Jágr season, the first year Jágr was on the Rangers.
And also on top of that, Jason Robertson is the exact player you buy low on.
Yes, that is an example of yes. There's volatility there. He has injury questions, he has playoff questions, but if you can turn, even if he's a consistent 85-point forward with good two-way stats, okay, that's your Panarin replacement, and that's one question you've established. And the last thing I wanted to say, you can take risks on the supporting cast. But the foundational pieces, your number 1 center, your number 2 center, your first 2 defensemen, your goalie, if you're taking big risks on those guys, you are really putting yourself in a difficult position. Think about the way Edmonton's roster is built. They have 2 of the 5 best forwards on the planet Earth. They are paying their goalies a combined $2.5 million this year. You are seeing what $2.5 million goaltending is worth. Because you have so much money tied up in a handful of guys, you have to build your roster a certain way. But because they have Leon, Connor, Bouchard, Ekholm, and now Wallman, who will be there next year, okay, it's easier to find a Brett Kulak replacement than it is an Evan Bouchard replacement.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky to find a replacement for Evander Kane because he makes a lot of money and he has a unique skill set. But it's easier to replace Evander Kane than it is to replace Connor McDavid. I think Florida has done a masterful job of this the last handful of seasons. They identified their core pieces: Barkov, Tkachuk, Reinhart, I would say Lundell, Forsling, and then Bob. Bob predates almost all of them other than Barkov, but they bet low on a bunch of guys. Brandon Montour, who they got for like a 2nd-round pick, turned into a top 4 defenseman. Sam Bennett, who I think is still leading the entire playoffs in goals, was 2 2nd-round picks. Sam Reinhart was a buy low candidate. Can the Rangers find one core piece? And that's where you get to someone like a JJ Peterka or a Jason Robertson of, you're buying low on an asset that's either coming off a disappointing season or injuries, but you're getting them at a point where they still have room to get better. Jason Robertson's only 23, 24 years old. You get the next 4 or 5 years of Jason Robertson, okay, you can convince me at least 3 of those 5 years are going to be valuable. Sure. You're betting on Gavrikov sustaining where he is going forward with no drop-off, and that's still arguably not a number 2 defenseman on a Stanley Cup caliber team. Like, even if he stays exactly what he is, that's probably not good enough, because that is too important of a role to be gambling on. If we're talking about, okay, perfect example, We knew they weren't going to be able to spend a lot in free agency 2 summers ago. So what did they gamble on? Blake Wheeler, Eric Gustafson, Jonathan Quick. Gamble small, win big.
Right.
Gamble small, lose. Okay, we only lost, 800 grand, and $1 million. Okay, that's bearable. You can afford those mistakes. If you mess up on Gavrikov or Provorov, you have Marc-Edouard Vlasic for 8 years, and you cannot get rid of him. Think about where the Penguins are at. Ryan Graves makes half as much as Edward Vlasic, and there's not a chance in hell the Penguins can get rid of him. They're going to have to buy him out. You could say the same thing about Tristan Jarry, where they bet wrong.
Yep.
They're dealing with the consequences. They cannot get rid of these guys without attaching multiple draft picks. Hell, you could even make an argument the Rangers probably need to do that if they want to get rid of Zibanejad. If you want to get Utah to take the final 4 years of that deal at $8.5 million per year, you're probably going to have to attach multiple draft picks to that to make that go away. And then you need to find another 30 to 40 goals. Like the longer we've talked about this, you start to realize just how much that needs to go right for them to be a contender again, let alone to be the best team in the NHL, let alone to be on equal footing with a Florida, with an Edmonton, a Dallas, a Colorado, a Winnipeg, a Vegas. They need so much to go right for them just to get back there. And then, the playoffs are a crapshoot. You can have a better team and it doesn't matter. You can be more talented. It doesn't necessarily matter. We saw the Panthers get to a Stanley Cup final, winning 3 games in the first round in overtime against the best regular season team in the history of this NHL format. You can be really good and luck will come and get you. And that's why, we've listed at least, 20 to 30 contingencies here to consider. And that's just to be good, let alone to actually be good enough to win 4 playoff series, something the Rangers have done 1 time since Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. This is as hard a task as it gets. No, Andrew, I said this the other day to one of my friends, and he looked at me like I was insane. I was like, the Japanese armed forces have bombed Pearl Harbor the same amount of times the Rangers have won the Stanley Cup since 1940. And he looked at me like I was insane. And yes, I am insane, and I'm not saying those are equal probabilities. I don't think Japan's going to bomb Pearl Harbor again because statistically, even though they've happened the same number of times, it doesn't mean they're equally likely to happen. But again, the Rangers have made 2 Stanley Cup finals since 1994, including 1994. 2 of the last 20-something years, they've gotten there. And they won 1 time.
31 years.
31 years. There is so much volatility baked into a given season. And then the more volatility you add, the harder this gets, the more random it becomes. Florida's going to have a sustainable contender for a while because Barkov, Reinhart, Kachuk, Forsling, they're all locked up. So they don't need to gamble on a top 6 winger. They don't need to gamble on a number 1 center, a number 1 defenseman. They're going to need to find a Bob replacement eventually because he's getting up there. But you need to find a lot less. And the less volatility the less volatility you have, the more certain you are, the easier it becomes to take risks too if you're Florida. We all looked at them like they were stupid when they signed OEL 2 years ago, and they got great results out of him. Nate Schmidt this year looked like maybe on his way out of the league, and he scored 3 goals in the Carolina series and I think has 8 or 9 points in these playoffs. The Rangers are going to have to take on risk to make up for their mistakes, and that's where you get in trouble, and that's where we see people who lose their house day trading, who lose their house, they lose their families, they lose their cars. You think you're smarter than the market. You're not. You cannot. You can't outsmart 31 other teams just with ingenuity. That's not how this works.
If you bet your house against the house, you are going to lose your house. That's how it goes down. You cannot bet.
Ingenuity alone will not get them out of this.
You cannot take such you can't bet. If you have $5 million in your bank account, let's say, you can't bet all 5 on black or on 0-0 and have no fallback option if it doesn't hit 0-0. It's the same logic that applies to when you go to Las Vegas and gamble, or if you open up your one of your 75 sportsbook apps and you bet on ping pong at 2 a.m. Same rules apply. If you are stupid, you are going to lose all of your money. You have no backup options, and you are, for lack of a better way to say this, completely effed. Or you bet smartly if you so choose to bet, which all sports teams do to a certain extent every single year. If you bet smartly, you can really make out a big winner.
Yeah, but you have to be patient.
Yeah,
You have to be strategic.
Listen, there's of course that sliver of a percentage that you bet your house on 0-0 and it hits. I'm not saying it's zero, but what I'm saying to you is that the likelihood of it happening, as you have no backup option to restore the giant asset that you are putting up, as collateral, is inherently very much not worth it. Extremely not worth it, and extremely, it doesn't make any sense to do that. The same thing applies for the Rangers. Why are you betting the house on somebody where if it doesn't work, you are just you're destroyed? You can't move him. You're it's a like you said, it's a Marc-Edouard Vlasic situation, and there is no way out. You don't have a plan B if that goes wrong. And that's the biggest part about all this, is that if you're going to gamble, you better make sure that you have a plan B that can get you out of your plan A if it doesn't work out for you. If you give Gavrikov 8 years or 7 years or whatever the market, allows, you don't have that. No. Your plan B does not exist. If Gavrikov falls off a cliff, like the Rangers had this problem with Wade Redden a few years ago, but because
that was like 10, you don't get to say a few about 10 years ago.
I mean, okay, a number of years ago at this point, but the CBA was different, so that if you send him to the Rangers got out of it.
They got a rule named after them,
right? There was a lot that changed as a result of that. The Rangers can't just send Gavrikov to Hartford and say be gone and your money will disappear. That's not how this works. If their plan A with these long-term big contracts don't work, they're stuck. They don't have anywhere to go, and you have to be really so immensely careful when doing that. You can't gamble stupidly. You got to gamble smartly. Gamble responsibly. That's the word that all the gambling ads have at the bottom.
And the last thing I'll say before we get out of here, and it's all reflective of this, you have to have a plan. And so much of my frustration and my malcontentness towards Chris Drury is rooted in that all of his decisions, for the most part, you can't say all, but a lot of his big decisions have been rooted in the idea they can't be wrong. Like he gave Zibanejad the huge extension when fall of 21, when he was in his walk year, and said, okay, that's our number one center. There is no alternative because you cannot get rid of that contract. He has a full no movement. He gets to pick if he leaves or not. There was no alternative for if that didn't work out. Trocheck, same thing. Long contract, no movement. JT Miller, okay, you got guys. They're not bad, but are they good enough? And Chris Drury has operated on those big swings that it's going to work out. A third-round pick for Carson Soucy, if you were the Florida Panthers and you were going to play him as your sixth defenseman, okay, that would have been a worthy gamble. Sure. To be your first pair left-handed defenseman, a guy who was struggling playing alongside Quinn Hughes, who when he was healthy was arguably the best defenseman in the entire NHL last year, it becomes a real challenging proposition of, well, what was the alternative? You can do this with the Buchnevich trade of, well, what happens if Sammy Blais doesn't work out? Well, not going to happen. It's going to work out.
Tough luck.
We're going to sign and trade for Barclay Goodrow. Well, what happens if he's 32 and you still have 3 years left on that deal? Well, why are you worried about that? They're going to win the Stanley Cup. And that's always the answer you get on the first day of free agency when the Rangers have done the big swing. When it's been Panarin, when it's been Shattenkirk, Trocheck. Well, if they win the Cup, it doesn't matter. They have won the Cup one time since 1940. At a certain point, you can't just do the devil's advocate argument all the time, because then that's not an argument. You're just doing a bit at that point. That's not an ideological position.
And again, doing that is great and all, and it's
good for conversation. For conversation's sake, making conversation, doing and covering the entire ground of a conversation. Yeah, sure, but
it's good to have beliefs in what you are doing. It's good to have confidence in the decisions that you're making, but you can't. The fallback can't be, oh, well, they're just going to win the Stanley Cup, so it doesn't matter. Like that,
because that's how they've operated.
That's not a fallback, because like that's, you can't, like, I understand like that's how the Rangers have operated, but like it can't be the way that you make decisions. You cannot operate in absolutes when it comes to sports ever. Like it's not possible. And it's great that you believe that the team, could win the cup with this move. To make a move with the thought process of they will, with no fallback option if they don't, that's how we get here. And herein lies the problem with the current roster as it is constructed.
Okay, I'm going to read you a John Steinbeck quote that's tied to this, and then we're going to get out of here because I want to sound smart. So, John Steinbeck once said, "Socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as exploited, but as temporarily embarrassed, and they will be rich someday." That is the way the Rangers have operated here. It's, well, I don't want rich people to be taxed a certain way because one day I'm going to be rich and it's all going to work out for me. So I have to prepare for this 1% outcome. If we win the Stanley Cup, it won't matter that we're stuck with Trocheck, Zibanejad, etc. for the next 4 or 5 years because we're going to win. It's going to work out for me. It is almost statistically impossible for it to happen, but it's going to work out for us. And like, really quick, there's 32 teams in the NHL. 1 divided by 32, that's your baseline percentage, of course. That doesn't account for weight, for quality. We know certain teams aren't serious contenders. We know only 16 teams make the playoffs at large. You start to game out the probabilities of what is likely to happen, and you see the Rangers are the guy who's betting on green, who's betting on 0-0, who's, okay, I've got $50 left. I'm going to bet it all on this hand of blackjack because I got to get my money back so I can go back to doing this and doing that. And the more you chase it, the harder it is to get back. That's why they tell you gamble responsibly, have a plan. And instead, Chris Drury keeps getting the little drinks with the umbrellas and saying, okay, $50, deal me in. Okay, do you want to split those 10s? Yeah, okay, let's split them. Okay, so we got 2 $50 hands on the table. Oh, we doubled up again? We got to split them again? So we got to play 4 $50 hands at once? And that's what trying to find a first pair left-handed defenseman, a top 6 forward, and probably another middle 6 forward, all in the same offseason is betting 3 separate hands that you've had to split 3 separate times. Because it's doable. You can win those hands, but you're probably going to lose. And that's the thing, man. Free agency, you almost certainly always lose. Like almost always. It is very rare, especially shopping at the top of the market, that it works out for you. It is really rare that it all just works out. Florida spent the most a team had ever spent on a goalie. And 4 or 5 years into that Bob contract, we were like, how the hell did they get rid of this? This is terrible. He lost his job to Spencer Knight, who was 19 years old. It took 5 years, 6 years for that contract to be worth it. If you give a contract out right now, this upcoming July 1st, and it takes 5 or 6 years to be worth it, you're talking about almost an entirely new Rangers team at that point.
Yep.
Because at that point, Adam Fox is 34 years old 5 years from now. At that point, Alexi Lafreniere is 29.
At that point, no one's going to be here. Drury's not going to be here. Like the world might end at that point. Like there's a whole lot of ifs that might happen in 5 or 6. Like you can't do that. You have to look at, okay, is this the right move for right now? And also, will this burn me 4 years down the line if he's still here? Gavrikov getting 7 years, if it doesn't work out, is going to be a problem that the next GM will it's an impossible task for the next GM to deal with. And I understand that, from Drury's perspective, that doesn't necessarily matter, but like you can't just give, a ton of money to a couple of these guys, have it not work, and then just say, oops, well, I tried. Well, good luck. Next guy, see you later. Like, you can't do that. You have, like, I would have to imagine that's not what's going to happen. Like, Drury is going to attack this, from I don't want to say a short-term view, but, okay, like, they have to do something now because he knows his job is on the line. So giving Gavrikov, like, a 7-year deal, I don't think is his priority given... he's on the hot, like I understand he got an extension. He is on the hot seat. Like, don't get it twisted. he is very much on the hot seat. If the Rangers don't make the playoffs again, he's not going to be here.
Magic Johnson was very prescient. I'm not going to be here. That's not my problem. You know, the Helen from Drake and Josh. That's not my job. It won't be Chris Drury's job if they miss the playoffs again. But at an hour 10, I do think it's time to call that for this week's episode of Liberty Blue. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star review if you're listening over on Apple or Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, like the video. Let us know how you feel about the Rangers' volatility, because this is very alarming when you consider how much they need to go right just to be a playoff team again, let alone to be Stanley Cup good. So sound off in the comments. Andrew and I will talk to you real soon. Maybe sooner if there's a Zibanejad trade, if there's a Panarin trade, or if they find a way to make something happen with K'Andre Miller. We'll do our best to cover it as it happens. We'll see you guys real soon.
Later.